Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. If you're either online live with us now or watching this later on YouTube, appreciate you taking the time. My name is Chris Edson. I'm the staff agronomist here with Brookside Laboratories, and we're going to be joined today with Mr. Dan Coffin from Biodyne USA. Dan has done a series of lectures with us and talking about biology and different nutrient management strategies. Met with us in Florida at the International Brookside Conference earlier this year. Been gracious enough to do a couple of videos now on the webinar series for us. Biodyne and Brookside have been forging more of a partnership here recently, and we've got some other projects working up for visits next month. But if you've got any questions about this, please feel free to reach out to me here at the laboratory or directly to Dan. That's absolutely fine. But quick background on Dan. Bachelor's and master's both from Purdue in agronomy, crops and soils, long experience in basic soils and soil fertility, laboratory work, been the technical agronomists for major crops and seed fertilizers, chemicals, owned several businesses in the agricultural world over the years, and he's been working with Biodyne Midwest and helping integrate more live biology into some of the top producing programs, and that's what he's going to talk about today. So we're going to focus on foliar nutrition and using live biology to help our systems. So with that, if you've got any questions or comments, please use the chat window here and make this as interactive as possible. So feel free to interject and get Dan off topic a little bit. I think that's where he thrives, maybe kind of weaving in and out. But so thanks, Dan, and I'll let you have at it.
Well, thanks, Chris, and thanks for the intro there. And I think, you know, in the intro, it's the realization that there are so many different challenges and opportunities within agriculture, no matter whether it's seed or chemicals or fertilizers or plant physiology, all these things. And that's really the irony of where this whole thing is headed. And my background is basically, well, I wouldn't say a jack of all trades and master of none, they say, but actually, but getting all that information as a background, that's what's bringing us to the forefront today, to allow people to integrate these programs. And that's what they should really be looked at as programs. So today, what we're going to be talking about is how do we take part of that technology, fertility and biology, turn that into a foliar nutrition opportunity and make that something that is encouraging soil and plant development, in some cases simultaneously. And so we're going to go into these foliar nutrition systems as a basis for that operation right now. So why in the world do we foliar feed? And there are multiple reasons. I think most people with this year, this is July of 2019, so we're looking at a lot of different stresses, a lot of really wet conditions and hot, dry conditions in the last couple of weeks here with needing some rain. And so number one, a lot of people think if I take the stresses off my plants or rescue them from extreme conditions, first and foremost, that's what I'm after. Obviously, first and foremost, we're after yield. And so it's a matter of understanding that we don't want the plant to get behind. People have asked me to speed crops up this year. I said the number one way to speed crops up is to make sure they don't get behind. Because if they do get behind, then water becomes a limiting factor. And when water becomes a limiting factor, you must have water from the top down, not being able to harvest it from underneath, because that stress burns the sugars and the plants run out of sugar and they stop the root development. And within 3 or 4 inches of that separation of the plant and that water front, it's over if rain doesn't come. In 2012, the worst drought in history, when people dug into their soil, they dug down 4 inches below where the roots had stopped. Plenty of moisture, and that was frustrating to them. So they understand that if they keep the sugars up in the plant, that sugar producing machine, the roots continue to grow. There's really no deficiency of water down there, because we only need a total of 8 inches throughout the entire year to get the work done, and most of our soils in this area can hold that. Second reason, remove nutrient known deficiencies. If there are known deficiencies in the tissue testing, we realize that we can adjust for that. And also to make plants grow in a different fashion than they may be used to, because in some cases we've always just used soil fertility and maybe tillage, aerification, these types of things to help grow plants. But when you bring plants into a known and specific type of foliar feeding, they can grow differently in appearance. And in some cases, people call it magic or mystery. they're healthier, they're bigger leaves, they're thicker stems, they're much more massive root systems. Well, it's because in some cases the plant is hungry, it's starving, it's not getting its food. It's getting plenty of nutrition, but it's not getting its food, and we're going to cover that here later. Obviously, to program yield, if that's still an option, if a plant is in a stage of its growth that it can still have influence on yield production, you can do that. If it's beyond it, now all you're going to do is maintain that yield or try to improve its quality, its test weight, things like that. So there are different things to consider there. And then obviously just to optimize yields on plants that are in that mode. If you have corn, for instance, that's growing at the latter part of the season in August and September, needing ammonium type nitrogens to give you test weight and dry matter, that's when you feed to optimize yield for that particular situation. So timing is critical. Should foliar feeding fit into the 4 R's, the programs of nutrient utilization? Obviously the answer is yes, and this is one way to finish it. All products are not created equal. When it comes to foliar application, we have a lot of people are like, I'm going out with some 28 or 1034O. Is it okay to use that? How do I use it? That's really not the smartest thing because they're not built for foliar activity. The cuticle on the leaf restricts some things from passing, and the stomata on the underside of the leaf that are open at certain times will allow things to move in as gaseous or mist states. So if you're timing your foliar applications, early morning, mid to late evening is the best time, middle of the day when oftentimes the stomata are closed up, you're only going to go through the cuticle. If you're going through the cuticle, you must be in an organic state like sugars or oils or waxes or things like that that can go through the cuticle. A lot of things don't just simply pass through the cuticle. So in creating foliars, it's a different world. Well, the 4 R's, as we mentioned, they're the right product, which would be the right nutrient or group of nutrients, group of products, the right form. There are chelated forms, there are sugar forms, sugar chelations, there are different types of nitrogen that actually, ammonium type nitrogens, ureas and amino acids and proteins definitely go across that cuticle. Creating the right types of products in the right forms is critical to get them across the right place. Well, we're obviously going to be putting them on the leaf surface or into the canopy. So we have to think about the technologies that are there. And then the right time. And as I said, typically in the early morning or very late afternoon or really the evening is the best time, even at night in some cases, but most people are not going to dedicate themselves to spray at night. But there's a definite difference between 5:30 a.m. and 7 a.m., 9 a.m., and 11 a.m. for the uptake. And that work has been done very successfully by private entrepreneurs as well as the universities. Also, spray before a rain event is even more efficient than after a rain event, because what you have to realize is if you put the right products into that plant a day or so ahead of time before a rain event happens, those nutrients help balance the plant, get the stress off, and then magically when the water from the rain hits the soil and brings the fertility from the soil into an already balanced plant, that plant blossoms and goes like crazy. So it dramatically improves the productivity quotient if you can spray before a rain event. Oftentimes products sprayed after a rain event don't show the same, or in some cases, no yield benefits whatsoever because the rain event took away all the stress. So it's smart to pre-plan if you can.
Dan, real quick there, sorry to interject there, but I can't see anyone ever talk about the 4 R's without interjecting that I believe it should be the 5 R's. And
okay.
with the 5th R being that we need to have the right data and the right information to help us make those decisions about what is the right product in the right place and the right time. So just one more thing I like to throw out there whenever I see a 4 R point.
Well, that's a very good point because, you know, a lot of people, Chris, just basically cross their fingers, think they're aware of what's going on and don't have a clue. And so you being very, very keenly aware of that as an agronomist and also working with the laboratory make a very valid point, because in many cases, a lot of people have never sprayed a pound of boron in their entire life. And most all soil tests as well as tissue tests as a result come back dramatically low in boron and sulfur as well. And so you're right, getting the right information, we should add that 5R. So maybe I'll go back and change mine to make sure we get that in there. What other things can determine if foliar feeding is more efficient? Well, previous dry fertilizer applied to fields, when you actually foliar feed a plant, sends a signal to the plant and says, hey, I've got some stuff up here. If there's anything down there, load me up and we'll work with it. So fields that have some dry fertility applied to it so that it's readily available can actually jump on and make that dry fertility more efficient. Low fertility fields that are limited in providing nutrients to a plant in some cases can limit it. However, if they're very biologically active, we find fields that are low in fertility on a soil test report that are biologically active are far, far more forgiving, and the biology is actually helpful to them. Having plant food and live microbes been used in the furrow? Have they been there? Because if there is not a lot of biology, but you have supplemented biology, you're going to see some things here in a few minutes, I think, that will stun you and what's really going on in this whole system as to why we should even have live microbes around the roots when we plant, and then live microbes on the leaf surface when we foliar feed. Is there moisture in the soil or rain imminent in the next 72 hours? That signal I mentioned a while ago that actually goes from the plant to the soil and the roots that says, hey, I have some extra information and some product here, that lasts for about 72 hours after application. So if you've got good soil moisture or average soil moisture, or rain is imminent, those are things to be thinking about in the big picture. And am I adding other things to my mix? Am I putting in pesticides? Am I adding oils or something that may strip the cuticle off and actually weaken the surface and open me up to more danger of burning and things like this? So these are things to be thinking about as you're thinking about that foliar pass. And most foliars typically go on as a free ride with another pesticide application. So making sure that you understand the integration of what you're doing with the foliar products that you're using with those products is extremely critical. Additions to the foliar pass that make sense or in a free ride. Food sources. I've never seen anything on this planet that's alive that doesn't get hungry. Plants are alive, soils are alive. Food is food, food is not fertilizer. And so as a result, food is really where a lot of this is going for most people. Sugars, organic acids, things that have an organic backbone. As we put those into the plant recognizes the food, brings in the nutrients as supplements, and then begins to really, truly blossom in its own right. Nitrogen and phosphate in the right forms for development. Ammonium nitrogen is very readily moved around the plant from top to bottom, and urea, when it goes on as a foliar, is an ammonium form. Nitrates are really for growth, and you can get nitrates in, but nitrates typically stay in the top of the plant, where the other forms can be moved all over the plant, even in amino acids and proteins. They can be moved around by the plant where the plant needs them. Phosphates need to be in an ortho form, so if you're buying something that's a 30% ortho and 70% poly, like 1034O, a very limited amount of things are going to go into that plant, and typically are going to burn them like crazy. So something in the realm of a 70 or an 80 or a 90%, even 100% ortho form is what you're going to need if you're going to do foliar feeding with phosphates. So the 624-6s, the 918-9s, 318-18s, those type of products that are high in ortho are what you're after. Boron and sulfur for ovule production. The ovules are determined, the number of seeds, ovules, are determined by the boron levels in that, and then also sulfur for helping actually in some cases to even turn the ovules on. Zine protein, for instance, is a sulfur requiring protein, and it only turns on kernels on an ear that have zine deposited in them, and that's at V3 or less, and sulfur is a mandatory element to make zine even work. Sugar production and protein increase for all of these things with boron and sulfur are critical. And we are seeing, to Chris's point on the 5 Rs, we are seeing dramatic reductions that the government is so proud of in our sulfur levels in the environment, in the atmosphere, and the soils are dramatically suffering. And you have to realize that sulfur is one of several elements that are critical to make amino acids and proteins. And without that sulfur, you don't make them. So life is limited when sulfur starts getting limited. Plant growth hormones, well, you've got root promoters, fruiting and branching promoters, also flowering promoters in that same realm, the same group of hormones. Ethylene inhibitors, which actually tell the plant, look, I know you're under stress, but you're going to make ethylene to fight the stress. And when you make ethylene, you shut down. Well, we can actually tell the plant, if we put the precursors in there that it uses when it's making ethylene promotion to shut down the chemical reaction so that it doesn't make ethylene, it will just kind of look at the stress and move on. And so we've learned what those inhibitors are, and you can actually spray those for very, very small dollars per acre, about $1 to $2 per acre, and you can keep the plant from going into shutdown mode during high stress periods. And those products are beginning to move like gangbusters, especially as we see these extremes between wet conditions and dry conditions and high heat. People love those products. And live microbes as a protectant to the biofilm or signals to the plant roots. Now that may be a mouthful, but live microbes actually are constantly in signal with the plant at the roots and on the biofilm or the surface of the leaf. And believe it or not, the microbes on the surface of the leaf are signaling and talking to microbes at the root system. This is the most recent and most wondrous information that the microbiologists are beginning to come up with. And as a result, what we understand is we can actually put certain microbes on the surface of a leaf, have them signal to their cousins in the soil to come and protect the roots, and they will, in a sense, set and protect on the leaf surface. So we're beginning to kind of look like the aliens on the planet when we begin to realize just how complicated, how complex, and how complete the system is in the surface that's always been bombarded with viruses and bacteria and fungi and actinomycetes and little tiny insects. We're realizing just how intimately involved they all are. Well, what about micronutrients? Because that's what 90+% of people think about for foliar nutrition is either a big slug of NPK or micronutrients. Well, most notably, we check for them in the laboratory to see if there are deficiency symptoms, or we're actually seeing physical deficiency symptoms, and we're using the laboratory to confirm it. If you have a certain nutrient, it should not necessarily be used as the only nutrient to repair. So if you see striping and you get a zinc, a positive for zinc and low zinc, zinc is obviously the missing nutrition. But some cases, once you fix the zinc deficiency, other things may have been sitting there in the waiting, been trying to move and couldn't. And then there's a big rush of something like manganese or copper or iron. And so what the universities have been saying, let's put the missing nutrient in combination with lower levels of the other nutrients in there with it, and that will fix our problem and keep it from jumping into the next near problem. They're used with food to move them around. Micronutrients actually go in there as a result. And so, for instance, boron helps move sugars around in the plant. So when we put certain nutrients in there, there are programs associated with those nutrients that make plants do things. We need to make sure they have clear and distinct programs when we put things on them. They should be used really only in chelated forms when going out with pesticides, because obviously we do have some sulfates, manganese sulfate, zinc sulfate, things like that that are working, but certain of those pesticides actually tie up some of those nutrients with their active ingredient. And not only do they tie up the nutrients that we wanted to get into the plant, we lose the active ingredient of the pesticide. Whenever we use chelated forms, that typically does not happen. So that makes them safe and deliverable and more consistent in their results. We've known with glyphosate, where it's used, the product should be sprayed with extra manganese and preferably with a little extra zinc, iron, and copper, only in the chelated forms. Manganese, when people first realized that they were flashing, they were putting manganese in there, and they might have used manganese sulfate, and they never got rid of the flashing. But if you use the right and proper chelates, you can use them at the same time. Most of the university people were saying keep the glyphosate and the manganese 7 to 8 days apart from each other, because you're just going to tie up the manganese anyway. But if you have the right chemistry in the water, that does not happen. Boron added to the foliars will help plants adjust sugar movements and typically improve yield potential. Again, because most people have never even used boron and are scared to death because they're thinking they're going to burn the plant to the ground. People that are now beginning to use boron are seeing dramatic increases in yield potential, and they're starting to use it in the soil programs as well as the foliar, and dramatically improving sugar flow and getting higher quality return on investment for yield, as well as a quality of the product itself. And moly will also help improve all legumes, because all legumes typically have nodules. The nitrogen production in those nodules needs moly to be able to make them work. Moly needs to go out in terms of ounces, 1 to 2 ounces or partial ounces per acre. That's all. So obviously it's very, very easy to put moly on as a foliar and keep the nodules cranking out, and moly is dramatically improving soybean yields. And also some of the microbes need moly to be able to make things work for themselves. So when some falls to the soil, some of the microbes in the soil get the moly. So here's a quick list of the specific nutrients and kind of what they do as an overview. And this is just an overview. So for instance, I put it in here for reference if you're coming back to this at a later date and you want to see it. So there's a list here, and we don't need to go through them. It's pretty well defined, but I will highlight one or two. Magnesium has been showing up very highly in a lot of the GMO crops as a result of some of the changes in the genetics. We're seeing a lot of magnesium deficiencies these days, even in high magnesium producing soils. So the only common bond between a lot of these crops is the fact that many of them are genetically modified, if it's Roundup Ready or root insects, these types of things. Magnesium is the center of the chlorophyll molecule, and just like in our blood, where the structure of hemoglobin and the structure of chlorophyll are almost identical, with the exception that chlorophyll has a nice long chain to carry energy. Magnesium is the center of chlorophyll, just like iron is in our blood. If we have iron poor blood, we're not developing the right amount of hemoglobin, we feel tired and run down. If you don't have enough magnesium in your plant, it's an energy conversion machine and it's carrying energy, and if it doesn't have enough magnesium, can't make enough chlorophyll, it's the same type of thing, and those plants cannot develop at the same rate. They still function, but they don't develop at the same rate and cannot give you top yield. So be very, very aware that magnesium is an opportunity for many, many of the crops today. And I said before, boron is critical. Iron for soybeans, most people are not aware that you have to have iron available at the root interface to even form a nodule, regardless of how many million or billion rhizobium are in the soil. If you don't have available iron to that plant in the right form, there is no nodule. As people have started using our biology, we have iron converting organisms in our biology, and they are saying magically, what kind of rhizobium are you putting in your seed treatments or in your in-row fertility with your microbes? Well, up till this year, there were none. We actually do now, but in the past we haven't, and the nodulation has been fantastic. It's because of iron availability that these things happen. Pesticides is the primary reason for the pass, and foliars are along for the ride typically, because that's what's happening. So post-emergent herbicides are the most common pass being made to most crops. Your glyphosate, glufosinate, which is Liberty, dicamba, clethodim in soybeans, and in many cases other things in corn. But these are the ones that we commonly think about, especially in a soybean pass, which is the most common one out here. And this does not need to be limited to soybeans. This can be to peanuts and cotton and turf, sod, grass, hops, all kinds of different things that we're spraying today. Most typically some type of a fungicide or an herbicide or insecticides going out there. Water volumes are typically 7 to 12 gallons per the acre, which are okay for foliars. If it's just a foliar feeding that you're doing, actually in most cases, lower volumes are better unless you're trying to mist it and run it into the stomates. If you're using 2 to 3 gallon of total product, 2 to 3 gallon of water to match it is typically the best, because it keeps it concentrated and it won't drip off. However, that's not easy for most people to accomplish anymore with the sprayer size and the tips that they have. So it's no problem to use 7 to 12 gallons, and it's really no problem to use 20. It's just, however, realize the more water you put on the surface, you're going to start to drip off. If it's fungicides, obviously you need more water and you need more pressure. So when you get a fine mist, you're going to have it all over the leaves, and you're going to have it going into the stomates as well. But there are situations where guys are always asking me, if I use 10 gallon water, is it fine? And the answer is yes. The water pH oftentimes should be acidified to maximize the availability of ingredients. We see that with certain micronutrient elements, as well as the pesticide effectiveness, because oftentimes the hard water that we have will bind up those pesticides and tie up their active ingredients. So making the water moderately acid to acid is a good idea for both the foliar feeding and the pesticides. The additives to the pesticides, such as adjuvants, should be considered too. Oftentimes they're saying we need more nitrogen, we need some surfactants, we need crop oils. Well, these are all ways to be able to actually get the plant to pull things in, or strip the cuticle off the surface to allow things to get in easier. In some cases they're tricks, in some cases they're not tricks, they're actually sad, cruel events. Anything that has sugar in it, when sugar hits the surface of a leaf, the physiologist will tell you within micro moments. They recognize the sugar, and the sugar's coming in. Sugar feeds the plant, sugar develops the plant, sugar moves things across the cuticle. Sugar helps in many, many ways, and this is why the development of the fulvics, the humics, the organic acids, the sucrose sugar, if you're even going down to a local um, warehouse supply, like the Sam's Clubs and the Costco's, and buying it by the pallet, the sucrose sugars, the molasses, the different types of products that are out there, they are all moving very big because they're both food and they're ways to help your foliars do a better job. The more adjuvants that are suggested, the hotter the mix is going to be. So I tell people, once you start playing with these foliar treatment products, things go in anyway. So be cautious. If they're saying lots and lots of oil, I typically say people, if you're using foliar nutrition and you're putting sugars or organic acid with them, cut the oil in half, cut the surfactants in half, and in some cases 75%, because the objective is get it into the plant. And in some cases, that's what these other adjuvants are designed to do. And if you mix all these things together and you get micronutrients, macronutrients, chemicals, and oil, you have created the hottest system you can get. And if you do that, you should be spraying in the morning or spraying in the evening or at night. You spray, if you're looking to burn, you'll spray in the middle of the afternoon. Trust me, you will burn. But if you want to keep the burn down, you need to keep out of those afternoons if you're going to make up all these hot mixes. It can also be an issue that reduces yield with certain fungicides if sprayed on the silks of corn or heads of wheat. That's sometimes the micronutrients to do that, but typically it's not the micronutrients. It's typically the surfactants that actually burn or hurt the silks, and that's why what a lot of folks have said, well, there is some effects of the physiology with some of the fungicides possibly, but the surfactants seem to cause problems. Well, the surfactant runs in faster, the surfactant can burn the silks, it can impede the pollination, and that's why people wait till brown silk, because they're assuming that they're not going to do any damage to that. All right, what timing should be considered for making optimal foliar treatments to crops? Well, for corn, V3 to V5 is when the plants finish the rows around and the rows long. So if you're looking to try to make a bigger ear, you need to get on it very, very early in its life. Or if you're looking to try to keep the maximum yield on the ears that you've set, that's pre-tassel to slightly post-tassel. I tell people to be cautious if you're using certain nutrients during tassel, and if you're using lots and lots of sugar, obviously you don't want to coat the tassels with sugar to make them sticky or they won't pollinate quite as well. So if you can do it slightly pre-tassel, corn that's chest to head high is perfect for timing before the tassels come out. And even if the tassels are beginning to kind of show, but they're not out, you're still plenty early. How about wheat? Well, you can again do, because all grasses do this business about very early setup. So you can do very early at or prior to tillering, or again, just like pre-tassel, you go to flag leaf or heading. Be careful again what you're putting together if you do have open heads exposed or are pollinating. But as you're in the boot or the heads just are coming out, that's plenty of time to get things in and do a good job there. Soybeans or edible beans, V3 to V5, as they begin to put on a number of leaves, and you can cause them to branch and get more branching. Or at R2, once you started seeing lots and lots of flowers or very early pods, that's a very good time to begin to help beans continue to flower and continue to help them hold the pods that they're setting. Sunflowers, the late vegetative stage or very early heading is about the best time. Alfalfa, we have some wonderful alfalfa programs that guys have switched over almost 100% and don't do lots and lots of dry fertilizer anymore. 7 days post-cutting after each cut is where most people start. Some people like to do it mid or late season to try to help the maximum availability of nutrition in the leaves before they fall. Peanuts, early growth for the roots prior to pegging and or early fill. Tobacco, early for the root mass, because the biggest limiting factor typically to tobacco is a good root mass that can stand up through all that season of difficult situations, extreme rain, extreme heat, extreme sunshine. And mid-season for leaf mass and thickness. So if you're looking at trying to make those leaves wider and thicker, heavier, then mid-season is obviously the time you're going to do this. Cotton, early for the root mass and development, pinhead square, for sizing and number of branches and bolls. And as you're thinking about all these things, always add food sources, either the organic acids like the humics or fulvics, or sugars for growth and stress relief if possible. The plants are a sugar conversion machine. They use sugar to fight every stress: the stress of heat, the stress of dry weather, the stress of cold weather, the stress of wet weather, the stress of insects. Plants that are high in sugars fight off everything as best they can. Plants that are low in sugars are a sucker for everything coming along to beat them. That's why when we talk about nature takes out the weakest first, insects don't like sugar. They don't like plants high in sugar, and they will, the plants will fluoresce a different color when they're high in sugar. And when they do that, they will either go, the insects will go to the stressed areas of the field, or if your field is nice and pretty, they will go to your neighbor's field. And we've seen this many, many times. People stand there and say, is that possible? You have to realize insect eyes are not like ours. They see in a different set of spectrums, and so they're picking up in UV and infrared. And when they fly over, they're looking for the beat up areas, and that's why nature takes out the weakest first. We can fix that if we constantly are foliar feeding our crops when stresses begin. Foliar applications, cost, timing considerations. A lot of people don't foliar feed. Even this year, with the way the crop is, a lot of people have said, well, I'm not going to spend any money, but they recognize the price of the commodities is going through the roof. So what's your budget? Can you afford something as simple as maybe just some sugars and some hormones to be able to make a plant like a bean plant branch profusely? Or are you looking at something like that in conjunction with some nutrients that you know may be missing? Have you already chosen to spend that money on other programs of dry or liquid applications? You see, if you come out with a completely designed dry fertilizer program and all your nitrogen on, your whole budget has been spent. And what people are finding out is, like, if we understand how to do this in a timely fashion, we can spend a whole lot less money and get a bigger return on investment, because timing allows us to do that. Now, obviously, timing is very much a concern, because timing even to get the plants in the ground this year didn't happen. So you can be messed up, and fortunately, there's always airplanes as an opportunity for these things, and as long as the clouds break and the planes can fly, you can do some things. Second, if you had a minimum for the least cost, what would it be? These ideas are above the whole idea of foliar feeding. They're like, well, is foliar feeding even an option? If you're looking to optimize that application, is it for limited nutrients that have been identified? There are all kinds of things to be considered in what this whole process is able to accomplish for me. Would you rather use a complete product for a little more investment than trying to figure out the individual needs of the plant? We have people that when we talk to them about foliar feeding, they're like, well, what nutrients would I use? What objective do you have? What stage of the plant is it? And if I have something like some sugars and some hormones and a little bit of stress relief that adds up to $5, but there's a pre-mixed program that makes more efficient use of other things, and actually when you put more things in there, they work together and are more efficient. So for $6, you pick up the nutrients and a little more help. These are the type of things that you should be asking your provider that's giving you these pieces to supply you with, what they have. Oftentimes they're just looking at you and you say, well, I'm going to spend $7 and that's it. Well, if that $7 buys a limited amount of nothing, that's one thing. But if that $7 can buy a nice complete program at another place with the right things, that could be huge for you in that season. What timing do you have left in the season? Is it just for something to put on in the past, or am I going to actually be in the right window for a big return on investment? A guy might tell me, I'm in corn and I'm in the sweet corn stage of my corn development. The kernels are just beginning to fill with milk, and am I too late? Actually, no, but you're too late for certain elements. You would want nitrogen in an ammonium form, an amine form, a protein form that's going to go right into the plant and move right to the test weight. If you use nitrates, they will be pushed down to the bottom of the plant and they won't do anything for you. If you're using micronutrients, boron will still help finish sugar flow. That's going to pay out. Phosphate can help you get high levels of sugar for the last little bit, and that'll pay out. Potash might get you a little bit of water movement, but many of the other micronutrients aren't going to give you any help at all. So it's not that it's a waste, because those nutrients can be put on the plant and then laid down. But in terms of return on investment, those are slim. So that comes to the last point there. What are my priorities? So the whole idea of what you're trying to accomplish Most people have not thought about this yet. They're not looking at foliar feeding as a part of the biggest picture. But that's exactly what foliar feeding has become. We used to not have the equipment to do this, nor the time to get it to happen. Now with the advent of very large equipment and being able to do things on a large scale with the right size, we can do a whole lot more and be a lot more efficient. And that's what this whole thing with plants is doing things with plants when they need it. You can use a whole lot less total fertility if you put things onto plants slightly ahead of when they need it. The plant doesn't care how it gets it, as long as it gets it. Well, what products are available? Just a quick shot through some of the products that we have here so you're aware of it, a little bit of our sales information. Sugars can be obtained from a number of sources and can be as simple as table sugars, sucrose that are on the table and used in cooking from the store. So if you've got a couple of bags of Domino sugar laying around and you got a couple acres, you're perfectly fine. The use rate is typically not more than 2 pounds per application per week. There are some derivations of that, but typically I tell people 1 to 2 pounds, because if the sugar's laying on the surface, it does move through quickly. But if it's thick and it cannot move through quickly because it's so thick on the surface and sugar lays there, fungi and bacteria in the air can drop onto that and begin to give you things like sooty mold and other things. So you keep it to a minimum. A little bit goes a long way in this scenario. So 1 to 2 pounds of application of sugar per application per week. Respite RX. This is a potassium product that has some fertility associated with it, but it is the ethylene inhibition product. This is a product that can go on at very low rates, 2 to 4 ounces foliar in with other things, and it actually will help keep plants from shutting down root systems and fighting those stresses. So it's used, can be used multiple times. And we see as people now in different parts of the country, especially in row crops, are seeing this, instead of using one product that's been out there in the market for many years at a very high cost per acre, one time and crossing your fingers and you're hoping you're at the best, if they're making 2 or 3 applications of pesticides or fertility across that field, they can put a little in it every time. And it only costs them a couple of dollars to do so. Balance. Balance, SG Elements Balance is a chelated micronutrient zinc, manganese, boron, iron, and copper scenario that are readily absorbable by the plant leaf surface. It's used at 1 to 2 pints per acre at key times to help improve nutrient needs of that plant. So Balance is the micronutrient package. Balance Plus comes in combination with stress relief products. And so you actually go one step further and saying, okay, I want to put on some micronutrients, but I want to make sure this plant doesn't see much stress at the same time, which is really smart. So most of the sales that we have come from the Balance Plus, not just the Balance. Same 1 to 2 pint per acre rate, and can probably be somewhere in the vicinity of $4 to $6 an acre when done. The biggest seller that we have typically is SG Advanced. This goes to the idea of a product that is very moderately priced. It's a total package of NPK. It has your micronutrients married into them. It gives you the stress relief that you're after. It brings in the foods and the microbes, because when you bring in the microbes, as I said a while ago, those microbes, those living microbes, when they're sitting on the surface of the leaf, begin to communicate with the plants underneath. How did they figure that out, by the way? Well, the irony of it is someone recognized that several of the microbes that do a lot of good work for protecting plants fluoresce in the UV light spectrum. So just like your kids, when you give them a black light and a shirt with the yellow lights or the yellow printing on it and the yellow stands out, what they realized was they took pictures of plant roots before they treated them with the microbes. And when they exposed the roots underneath and took a picture, you couldn't see anything except, some heavy roots that might be showing up where there were thick, heavy roots. But then they went back and put on the microbes, certain microbes, Bacillus amyloliquefaciens specifically, on the surface of the leaf, came back 24 to 48 hours later, exposed the roots and took a picture with that same UV light, and lo and behold, almost the entire root system had been outlined, which basically is saying that microbes like Bacillus subtilis and Pseudomonas fluorescens, which are very, very well known for protectants and are fluorescing in the UV light, were drawn to those roots as a result of their cousins being put on the leaves and signaling to them. And they repeated that multiple times, and it's the same way every time. So when you're looking at doing foliar programs, if you want to leave no stone unturned, you buy these complete packages that go on at about a half a gallon to the acre and can be relied upon to give fairly consistent results of color change, branching and leaf flower formation, and nutrient qualities, as well as improving soil health and plant health. And that's where we find ourselves today. So, in summary, foliar feeding can be utilized to do a multitude of things. Resolve those nutrient issues that you know about. Balanced tissue tests that you've taken are trying to help the plants stay in a balanced situation. Reset growth patterns, overcome stress early in the season when the crop is behind and it's off color and yellow. If you can get across the top of it, you can actually get it out of a growth funk. Plants get into a growth funk and they don't know what to do. If I spend energy, try to make roots, I could die. It's awfully hot and dry, but I need roots. I don't know what to do. You tell them what to do clearly, you can help them move forward. It's almost like taking care of children that don't know which direction to go. Give them some direction, straighten them out, lo and behold, they can respond. Feeding the soil microbes, you can actually, because plants do feed soils, when you put sugars and micronutrients and improve the sugars into plants, 20%, folks, 20% based on university research of those sugars, those photosynthates that the plant makes, they're kicking out into the root zones. They're feeding the soil microbes because the microbes are what's responsible for releasing the elements back out of the clay and the silt and the sand to those plants. So they are taking care of their own self underneath the soil. So you're helping them do that. And obviously the number one thing that has to happen typically in all these is we have to maximize yield. If we're not getting a return on investment, people are not going to do this. To make those things happen, you do need to understand the proper timing and the needs of your plant. Most of us would like to spray corn when it's knee-high to waist-high just because we have time and it's easy to get through them and most of us have the equipment. That's not necessarily the best time, as you learned before. A lot earlier or significantly later. Understand the plant that you're feeding and you'll be far, far more efficient in the results that you obtain. Use the correct nutrients in the form and the timing for the need in the plant. Make sure that whoever you're working with, they're not necessarily just selling you because they have something in a jug. They need to be the right types of products. And even some of the lesser products can be used at the right times. But if not, if you don't know what you're doing, don't necessarily just line up and say, okay, I'll take what you've got, because that may not work. And also use them in the proper balance. It's not a surprise, because those of you who are Brookside lab people understand that balance in the soil is critical. Well, even when you're putting things into the plant itself, a proper balance, decent ratios of certain products, rather than just trying to slam one or two right down their throat, it makes more sense. So when we go back to the SG Advance, we have balanced those a little more properly to make sure that the plant can utilize them. And as last, always use food sources with the application if you can to improve the uptake and the response of the products that you're bringing forth to try to use on that plant. Realize that if nothing else, if all you've done is improve the growth of that plant, make it a bigger, happier, healthier plant, and you're harvesting nutrition better and harvesting sunlight better, you're putting more organic stuff into that soil. And if you don't get the yield response that you were after, but you improve the growth of the plant and you put the nutrients in the plant, when you lay that plant down, foliar feeding makes that a much more even distribution of nutrients across that acre. And when those plants lay down, we've seen guys after 2 and 3 and 4 years of foliar feeding, their micronutrient levels in their farms are improving dramatically, because all those nutrients don't go into the grain. They stay with those plants, and as those plants are evenly distributed across the field, lo and behold, so are the nutrients. And so it really is starting to fill a lot of niches for people that they didn't think about even in the last 5 years. That's a lot, I realize, to take in for today, but that's the end of my presentation as I see it for the things that I wanted to cover today. So I will leave it for any questions that may come up here in the chat, or even if we want to unmute and ask them, and I'll be glad to answer them. And if there are no questions, then we'll just leave it for the recording and hope that all of you that have listened, we thank you for your time. We appreciate the willingness to allow us to help you be informed. And as a part of the thing we're doing here at Biodyne, as many of the companies are today, education is preeminent in what we're trying to help our people do. And most people are very, very appreciative of it. So thanks again for your time. I'll look in here and see if there's anything in the chat, or Chris, if you want to finish up here, I'll let you do that.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you first off, for taking the time to help us out, Dan. So here at Brookside, we've got a list hanging in most offices of our core values as a company, and I just thought it'd be a good way to close here and thank you. But number 5 is teamwork. So teamwork, that working with Biodyne and helping educate our growers and our network is on there. And I'd like to thank anybody that's coming through later on YouTube to sit down and watch this. Number 10 is disciplined. So being disciplined to sit down and take the time to invest in yourself and your growth. We do really appreciate everyone doing that. So that's really all I've got to kind of close up. So just thanking Dan for taking the time, everybody at Biodyne for working with us, and everybody that's taking the time now at YouTube to educate yourself and grow along with us.